Namaste. This lecture is engaged with the Bhagavad Gita's educational doctrine. The question is, can the Bhagavad Gita be a source of an educational doctrine? Can the Bhagavad Gita be read in humanistic terms, and as such, can an educational doctrine be extracted from it? And can it contribute to the philosophy of education? The present book, which we have been discussing, has been much engaged with metaphysics of the Bhagavad Gita, its structure, and the way it gradually leads towards liberation. However, the present lecture aims to look at the Bhagavad Gita in humanistic terms, or applying our terminology in first story terms, with the aim of highlighting some of its major educational elements, or stated differently, elements out of which an educational doctrine could possibly be articulated. Klaus Klostermaier, I already mentioned that, notes that many are convinced that the Bhagavad Gita is the key book for the re-spiritualization of humankind in our age. Moreover, many Hindus and increasingly many non-Hindus too have considered the Bhagavad Gita not only a book to be read and studied, but they take it as a guide in their lives. The famous philosopher John Hick places the Bhagavad Gita in the axial age to which the major world religions trace their roots. He notes that around the middle of the first millennium BCE, in a band time stretching from about 800 to about 200 BCE, remarkable individuals appeared across the world, standing out from their societies and proclaiming numerous new insights. In China, there were Confucius, Mencius, Lao Tzu, Muzhu. In India, there were Gautama and the Buddha, Mahavira, and the founder of the Jain tradition, and the writers of the Upanishads. And later he says that there was the Bhagavad Gita. That's John Hick. In Persia, there was Zoroaster. In Palestine, there were the great Hebrew prophets, Amos, Hosea, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel. And in Greece, there were Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. This immensely significant hinge in human thought has come to be known as the Axial Age. This is a quote by John Hick. These individuals and treatises have no doubt deeply shaped the world's culture for hundreds and thousands of years to come, and the Gita no doubt occupies a central place therein. As such, it may be justly asked, what are some of the main elements out of which such a doctrine, an educational doctrine, could possibly be constructed? So the present lecture is engaged with the following topics: spirituality, virtue ethics, conquering lust and anger, following dharma in every sphere of life, happiness, meditation, the divinity of nature, an ecological worldview, and finally, devotion. We realize that there are many more themes that could be developed, but these would be beyond the scope of the present lecture. So that's the focus of this lecture. So first, let us be engaged with spirituality. Before engaging with specific topics and categories mentioned, perhaps a single term that seems to characterize and encompass the entire teachings of the Bhagavad Gita should be looked into, and that is spirituality. John Haldane considers that there is a further area of human existence, the spiritual, which is not essentially in concern with action in relation to the rights and interests of others, and which has something to do with how one experiences the world and what one makes of that experience. It is primarily a matter of what personal demeanor or mode of being one develops in the face of reality, as one understands it in some ways, in some more or less philosophical ways. He adds that in antiquity, the existence of such matters was recognized and catered for within philosophy. You see, spirituality was part of philosophy. Interestingly, Haldane not only considers spirituality as a mode of being one develops in the face of reality, but indicates that in antiquity, spirituality was recognized and catered for within philosophy. As the Gita's compilation is dated to the 4th or 2nd century BC, it certainly belongs to the category of ancient philosophy, and as such, we suggest to study its educational doctrine in comparison with similar philosophies of antiquity belonging to the Axial Age. John Cottingham, considers care of the self, to be an aspect of spirituality and associates it with Socrates. Moreover, in doing so, he follows Foucault and writes that the idea of care of the self, though it clearly does not exhaust the domain of the spiritual, does seem to capture an important part of what most people understand by it. It is an idea that modern academics do not tend to associate with Socrates. Cottingham surmises that most of us prefer to see him as wholly rationalistic figure, Socrates, and construe the existatus bios, the examined life, which he recommended, as principally a matter of analytical logical inquiry. But in fact, it is difficult to read what Socrates says about his inner voice, about the reach of purity, for purity of conscience and integrity, without seeing the examination he advocates as indeed possessing the spiritual dimension identified by Foucault. Foucault shows how this notion of self-examination and care for the self resonates through subsequent Hellenistic thought in the Epicurean therapeutic conception of philosophy and the Stoic notion of the care of the soul. That's from Cottingham. This notion of care of the self no doubt characterized the teaching of the Bhagavad Gītā as a therapeutic aspect of ancient philosophy that seems to encompass both the East and the West, or at least Indian and Hellenistic philosophy. Regarding this notion, Cottingham further writes that the notion of care of the self no doubt has cognitive implications, such the famous Augustinian inward turn, for example, is partly a search for a more adequate grasp of one's own nature. Carol Harrison, important Oxford theologian, sheds light on this concept of inward turn, which seems to be compatible in some ways with the Gita's spirituality. Accordingly, the inward turn, an ascent of the soul to God, which St. Augustine describes in the Confessions, is distinctively Platonic in its description of a graded hierarchy of spiritual reality and relative goodness. In this Platonic worldview, the body and the senses are placed at the lowest level from the divine. They are simply distractions and temptations away from higher, immutable spiritual reality. The latter is to be sought by the spiritual nature of humankind, the soul, which by the process of introversion, of judgment, of lower levels of reality and ascent towards the higher, gradually moves towards the transcendent. That's by Carol Harrison. We have referred to the graded structure of reality, which is somewhat similar to the Platonic description of a graded hierarchy of reality through our three-story house model. Also, the Augustinian concept according to which the senses are placed at the lowest level from the divine is in some way similar to the Gita's concept, according to which it is said that the senses are elevated, but above the senses is the mind. This is a quotation from the 3rd chapter. The intelligence is still higher than the mind, but superior even to the intelligence is the soul. So this was a discussion of spirituality, and basically I'm arguing that the Gita promotes spirituality. Now, we'll discuss virtue ethics. Having offered a brief discussion of spirituality and having placed the Bhagavad Gītā in the realm of ancient philosophy, we may proceed to examine some of the Gita's main educational doctrines. A major educational concept is that of virtue ethics. Virtue ethics, also called virtue-based ethics and agent-based ethics, are conceptions or theories of morality in which virtues play a central or independent role. That is, it is more than simply the account of the virtues offered by a given theory. Some take the principal claim of virtue ethics to be the moral subject, that is, in living his or her life, they should focus their attention on cultivation of their or others' virtues. It can be construed strongly as holding that moral virtues are more basic than other moral concepts. In such virtue ethics, virtues are fundamental. That is, claims about other moral concepts are either reducible to underlying claims about moral virtues or justified on their basis. Forms of virtue ethics predominated in Western philosophy before the Renaissance, most notably in Aristotle, but also in Plato and Aquinas. In the Gita, there are these three lists of qualities comprising virtue ethics, and a fourth, negative one. These differ in their emphasis. The first list appears in chapter 13 and promotes values that are associated with renunciation, as it supports detachment and development of a yogic vision. The list of ethics seems to befit a solitary ascetic engaged in meditation while devoted to the Supreme Person. So I share screen. So that's from the 13th chapter. Absence of pride and arrogance, non-violence, forbearance, honesty, attendance upon the Guru, purity, firmness, self-control, lack of attraction to sense objects, absence of ego notion, visioning the distress and evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, aloofness from sons, wife, home, and the like, constant equanimity toward desired and undesired events, single-minded devotion to me, supported by yoga, preferring of solitary places, and avoiding the crowds, constant contemplation of knowledge of the self, envisioning the purpose of knowledge, concerned with the truth. All these are declared knowledge, whereas all else is ignorance. So this is a list from the 13th chapter. This list of values is present in reply to Arjuna's request to know about knowledge and may be termed supportive ethical values, as they support knowledge of rebirth. Interestingly, in his reply, Krishna does not address the question directly and does not talk about knowledge in epistemological terms. Rather, he presents this list of qualities. Accordingly, these represent knowledge, while their absence signifies the absence of knowledge or ignorance. In other words, the underlying logic is that the consequence of possessing knowledge of rebirth is manifesting in the qualities listed. The type of knowledge under discussion is not quantitative, intellectual, or encyclopedic knowledge. Rather, it is knowledge of a different sort, intuitive or perhaps even mystical, acquired through inner transformation. The values described may be termed supportive. They are necessary for maintaining the vision of rebirth, and this includes attendance upon the Guru, a principle which is also expanded upon elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gītā. And I now share screen and read this very famous verse of 434. Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashtena sevaya upadekshyatite jnanam jnaninastatvadarshina. Know this by falling at the feet of the master, asking him questions and offering him service. In so doing, men of wisdom and vision of the truth will impart knowledge unto you. So, here we have scholars know Chudhari and Prabha. They know that the Bhagavad Gītā emphasizes the importance of the guru-disciple relationship, where the teacher acts as a guide and mentor to the student. This method promotes a personalized and intimate connection between the teacher and student, fostering trust, respect, and a conducive environment for learning. The teacher imparts knowledge, wisdom, and spiritual guidance to the student, who is encouraged to be receptive and attentive. Verse 10, which reads single-minded devotion to me, may also include a general sense of dependence upon the Supreme, a principle which appears later in the Gita. So now I'm reading about this dependence upon the Supreme, which is also a form of virtue ethics. So that these are two verses from the 18th chapter. Just depend upon me in all activities, holding me to be the supreme, taking refuge in the yoga of enlightenment. Be constantly absorbed in me. Absorbed in me, you shall overcome all the hardships by my grace. Chaitasa sarva karmani mai sanyasya matpalaha buddhi yogam pashritya machita satam bhava machita sarva durgani mat prasadat tarishyasi atachetva mahangalan ashroshasi imukshasi. So, this is a general principle of religiosity, according to which one is not only aware of the presence of the Supreme throughout everyday life, but develops a sense of dependence upon the Supreme Truth with a constant hope for achieving divine grace. At any rate, adopting a wider point of view, the Gita may be read as a manual of purification to be accomplished in the midst of life. That's quote by a famous scholar called Joel Cooperman. Apparently, an aspect of its merit is the suggestion that in an ethic of virtue is not committed to codifiable and abstract rules of conduct, but can locate the ethical in the broader constitution of human agency, taking account of character, emotions, social context, and even fortune and misfortune. The second list, which I'm going to read, appears in chapter 16. It depicts the characteristic qualities of righteous persons and conversely those of the wicked persons. So this is virtue ethics from the 16th chapter. The Blessed Lord said, fearlessness, purification of one's whole being, firmness in spiritual knowledge, generosity, self-control and sacrifice, studying the Veda, austerity, righteousness, non-violence, truthfulness, absence of anger, renunciation, tranquility, avoiding vilification, compassion for all beings, absence of greed, gentleness, modesty, reliability, vigor, tolerance, fortitude, purity, absence of envy and pride. These are the qualities of one born to divine destiny, O Bharat. So this list is contrasted with another list, a negative one, depicting the opposite qualities of the demonic. So that's the demonic people now. That's the anti-virtue ethics. Demonic people do not know when to act and when to avoid acting. Not purity, no proper conduct, no truth is to be found in them. They claim that this world is unreal, lacking a solid foundation, not controlled by the Supreme, and that it originates not from causal succession, but rather that lust alone is its cause. Maintaining such a view, these lost souls of little intelligence, enemies to all, initiate horrible acts aiming to destroy the world. Resorting to insatiable lust filled with hypocrisy, pride, and intoxication, and accepting false ideas out of illusion, they proceed with their impure way of life. Subject to boundless anxiety, ending with death only, they are convinced that there is nothing higher than gratification of desires. Being trapped and bound by hundreds of hopes, absorbed in desire and anger, they seek to accumulate wealth by improper means in order to indulge in their lusts. This much have I accumulated today, and that wish shall I obtain later on. The wealth is already mine, whereas that wealth will become mine. I have slain that enemy, and others will be similarly slain. I am the Lord, I am the enjoyer, I am perfect. I am powerful and happy. Ishvaraham aham bhogi sado ham balavan sukhi. Very famous. I am wealthy and of high family. Who else equals me? I shall sacrifice, give charity, and rejoice. This is the mind and view of those whom ignorance bewilders. Led astray by multitude of thoughts and captured by the net of delusion, and addicted by it to enjoy nasty desires, they fall into the abominable hell. Wow. So that's a list of anti-virtue ethics. It emphasizes what virtue ethics are by seeing the contrast, the opposite qualities. Yeah, so I'll skip that and offer the third list, and this appears in chapter 12. This is more devotional, and this is also a list of virtue ethics, but this one depicts the qualities of the devotee. That's 12th chapter. He who hates no living being, is friendly and compassionate, is devoid of possessiveness and egoism, equal in distress and happiness, forbearing towards others, a yogi who is always contented, self-controlled and firm resolution, whose mind and consciousness are absorbed in me and is a devotee of mine. He is dear to me. He by whom no one is agitated, nor is he agitated by anyone, who is free from joy, impatience, fear, and distress. He is dear to me. He who is dependent on nothing, is pure, adept, uninvolved, free from misery and anxiety, who has abandoned personal ambition and is a devotee of mine, is dear to me. He who neither rejoices nor is disgusted, neither laments nor yearns, renouncing the auspicious and inauspicious alike, and is filled with devotion, is dear to me. He who is alike towards friend and foe, and faces in like manner honor and dishonor, cold and heat, happiness and distress, free from attachment, to whom blame and praise are one, satisfied under any circumstances, homeless, of a steady mind and full of devotion. Such a person is dear to me. Those devote to me who worship this eternal path of Dharma, thus described, faithful and accepting me as the Supreme, are very dear to me. So that was another list of virtue ethics. Let's summarize that and say that apparently these qualities represent the virtue of Bhakti Yoga, that they intertwine devotion with yoga, and as such, virtue ethics comprise one of the Bhagavad Gīta's major teachings. So now I'm going to address the next category, which is conquering lust and anger. Conquering lust and anger. A major Gita theme is that of conquering of lust, the conquering of lust and anger, which are seen as the enemies within. Arjuna inquires as to the force that drives one to perform evil action, even against one's will or interest. Krishna replies that it is lust that is situated in the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. It overshadows the soul's true knowledge. It burns like insatiable fire, and it impels one to perform evil action. As such, lust is the foe within, and it is to be curbed through sense restraint. So now I'm sharing screen and reading about lust. Arjuna said, this is the 3rd chapter, what is it that impels one to commit evil, even against his will, as if driven by force? O descendant of Vishnu, the blessed Lord said, it is lust, it is anger, kama esha, krodha esha, originating from the passion, guna, rajaguna samudava. It is the great evil and great devourer. Know that to be the enemy. As fire is obscured by smoke, as mirrors covered by dust, and as embryos covered by the womb, so the living being is obscured by lust. This eternal enemy covers even the wise one's knowledge, or kuntiya, having taken the form of this insatiable lust, fire, lust. It is said to abide in the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Through these, it deludes the embodied soul and clouds its knowledge. Therefore, bull among the Bharatas, you should control the senses first, then destroy this evil, the destroyer of knowledge and insight. So, interestingly, this theme of conquering lust and anger very much resembles Stoic philosophy, Stoa, and some comparative reflection may be due. Roughly speaking, the ancient Stoics spanned the period from 300 BCE to 200 CE. They are part of the broad Hellenistic movement of philosophy that follows upon Aristotle and includes, in addition to Stoicism, ancient skepticism and Epicureanism. The early Greek Stoics, known as Old Stoa, were interested in systematic philosophical thought that join ethics together with studies in physics and logic. Indeed, the Stoics argue strenuously that anger and rage are, on the whole, pernicious emotions. They do more damage than good. No plague has caused the human race more, Seneca says in his famous treatise on anger. Part of the problem with anger, according to Stoics, is that it cannot easily be moderated. Once turned on, it cannot easily be turned off. It is a runaway passion, the Stoics would say, whose stride outpaces reason and its command. It is the most rabid and unbridled of all emotions, says Seneca. According to the Gita, lust and anger are ground in the Rajaguna, the guna of passion, and they comprise one's real enemies. Apparently, the Gita holds similar views in that lust and anger burn like a fire, force one to act against his or her will, and cover and cloud one's knowledge. As such, the Gita's teaching concerning conquering anger is similar to the Stoics' teaching. So now I'm going to address the next topic, which is following Dharma in every sphere of life. That's a major Bhagavad Gītā teaching. Perhaps the Bhagavad Gīta's most central educational teaching is that of Dharma. It ties together the entire text and is the locus upon which karma, jnana, yoga, and bhakti are practiced. Moreover, it teaches individuals to recognize their responsibilities and fulfill them with sincerity and dedication. The Gita is dharmic from beginning to end. And as a lecture was devoted to this topic, we wish not to repeat its contents. As such, a short discussion will ensue aiming at highlighting the similarities between Dharma and two similar concepts. One is Jewish halacha, and Chinese Confucianism. So now I'm comparing Dharma to Jewish halacha, Jewish law. In general, Jewish ethics understand the individual's relation to the family and community through the notion of duty. Judaism perceives the individual as a member of community bound by duties rather than rights-deserving individual, and as such, the focus of Jewish ethics is on familial and communal responsibility. The main Hindu term denoting ethics is dharma, and the notion of duty is realized within this framework, encompassing various ethical prescriptions or commandments. A central or even extreme statement is made by the Gita in this regard. And now I'm quoting Gita 3:35. Better to be deficient in following one's own dharmic duty than to perform another's duty well. Even death, while performing one's own duty, is better, for following another's duty invites danger. Very strong verse, appears twice here and also at the conclusion of the Gita. In short, Dharma is an all-encompassing ideology that embraces both ritual and moral behavior, whose neglect would have bad social and personal consequences. Both Dharma and Halacha share a deep commitment to practicing a detailed and particular way of life, whereas Hinduism has developed detailed Dharma Shastra literature. Judaism has developed Halacha, which is similarly particular and detailed. Both Dharma and Halacha carry a notion of intertwining ethics and religion. Dharma conveys the notions of duty, law, order, religion, justice, and morality, and Halacha carries similar such notions. Both Dharma and Halacha literature are grounded in ancient sources. Dharma is grounded in the 6 Orthodox schools, whereas Halacha comprises an expansion of the biblical commandments. Similar to Confucianism, which considers ethics to merge with metaphysics and cosmology, Indian thought too makes these connections. So now I'm speaking about Confucianism and comparing that to Dharma. According to the Confucian understanding of the world is sustained by or structured around 3 foundations, which are also termed the 3 powers of the universe: Tien, heaven; Di, earth; and Ren, humans. In a more context, heaven is understood to be the source of ethical principle and the supreme sanction of human behavior. The Confucian heaven functions as the ultimate reality to which human beings are answerable with respect to fulfilling their duty. This also defines citizenship in political terms, as the Confucian notion of citizenship is defined through submission to the mandate of heaven, yeah. Similar to Confucian idea that the cosmic order is generated by heaven, the Gita holds a similar view according to which Dharma has its source in the Supreme. Accordingly, it is the Supreme who descends to earth to establish Dharma. So now I'm comparing Bhagavad Gita to Confucianism. They say that that the law comes from Tien, from heaven, and Bhagavad Gita says that Dharma comes from the Supreme Lord. That's the comparison. That's these two very famous verses. For 7, indeed, whenever a decline of Dharma occurs and a surge of Dharma, then I myself appear to rescue the good and the pious, to destroy the evildoers, and to reestablish Dharma. I myself descend age after age. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyutanam adharmasya tadatmanam sujamyaham paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma samstapanartaya sambhavami yuge yuge. The Confucians include rules of behavior governing the interaction between people in recurring social contexts, such as the way to conduct sacrifices, marriage ceremonies, and funerals, the way for hosts and guests to interact, as well as various obligations one has towards another person in virtue, according to the different positions the two occupy within the family or state. The term li, which often refers to such rules, is often translated as rites, because it originally referred to the rites of sacrifice, and even when used more broadly to refer to various rules of conduct, it still emphasizes the ceremonial. Similarly to Li, Dharma also serves as a framework encompassing a large body of social rules and conduct, preserving and transmitting human culture. There are no doubt many subtleties here, but a major similarity between Dharma and Confucianism is the principle of promoting action out of duty, also Judaism, and distinguishing this higher mode of action from the lower mode of acting for the sake of profit, or as we say, for the sake of the fruits of action. So that was a discussion of Dharma. Now I'm moving to the next category, and that is happiness. Happiness. The question may be raised, is happiness a teaching or lesson in itself to be practiced and learned? It seems that attaining internal happiness requires some practice, and as such, it may be worth looking into this topic. The following section describes the ideal yogi. On the one hand, he rejects external sensual happiness experience, but on the other hand, he cultivates inner bliss or happiness. So this is chapter 5 of the Bhagavad Gita. He is unattached to external sensual object, contacts. He finds within himself great bliss. He is absorbed in Brahman through yoga, and as such he relishes permanent happiness. Those pleasures springing from sensual contacts are indeed nothing but source of misery. Very central verse. Moreover, they have a beginning and an end, and as such enlightened do not rejoice in them. Yahisam sparsha jaboga dukkha yonaya evate adyanta vanta konteya nate shura mate buddha. He who can withstand the urges originating from lust and anger in this world before release from the body is yoked and is a happy person. He whose happiness is within, whose pleasure is within, and his enlightenment too is within, is actually a yogi. With his whole being absorbed in Brahman, he attains to extinction in Brahman. So this was chapter 5 regarding happiness. External happiness and internal happiness are contrasted. External happiness originates in ephemeral sensual experience. and as such breeds only suffering, while internal happiness attained through purification, self-restraint, and immersion in Brahman is eternal and never-ending. This discussion sheds light on the state of inner joy, representing a gradual relinquishment of worldly attachments, along with a gradual establishment in the spiritual reality. All this resembles Stoic philosophy, which, similar to the Gita, rejects external happiness in favor of internal or real happiness. In regard to external happiness, Sherman, scholar, cites Marcus Aurelius, the famous Roman emperor, who was a Stoic, who warns how one can be lured away from reason by the attractions of place of, I'm not sure if it was Stoic, or place of wealth or pleasurable indulgence, and how a zeal for glory can pervert happiness. A repeated theme is that we live in the Heraclitan world of flux. To find happiness, we cannot hold on too tightly to what is transit and beyond our control. The Stoics teach self-sufficiency and the importance of detaching from dependence on worldly goods that make us vulnerable. In a similar fashion, they advocate a detachment from sticky emotions that mark our investments in things beyond our control. That's all a quote by a scholar called Sherman. As far as attaining internal happiness, having rejected external happiness, Sherman, scholar, notes that Seneca insists that we can control this hideous frenzy and rid ourselves of its corrosive effects. The method is straightforward, even if bold. Let go of the attachments to honor and reputation, or victory or wealth, which when threatened make us angry. These are not real goods, he teaches, following ancient Stoic doctrine. True, the Stoics concede they are the kinds of goods that we might like to have, which we would prefer rather than reject. But having them really does not add anything substantive to our happiness. They are not genuine parts of happiness, for happiness in the Stoic view, which closely follows Socrates' teachings, is only a function of inner virtue. Its prosperity is the prosperity of virtue, not of wealth, fortune, or the opinions of others. Similar to the Stoic view, the Gita promotes internal happiness, which can be achieved following the rejection of external happiness. So the next category I'm going to discuss is meditation. Meditation. As a yogic text, the Bhagavad Gītā promotes meditation, which is the yogic practice called dhyana. Preceding meditation is a stage of pratyahara, which is described at the end of chapter 5. So this is a description of pratyahara, and that appears at the age of the 5th chapter. Shutting out the sense impressions, focusing the gaze between the eyebrows, balancing inhalation and exhalation within the nostrils, restraining the senses, mind, and intelligence. Thus the sage who is intent on liberation and whose desires, fear, and anger are gone, is indeed forever liberated. So apparently, the 4 higher yogic stages, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, are introvertive states. As such, pratyahara requires detachment from the objects of the senses. Dharana requires inner concentration. Dhyana involves meditation, and the state of samadhi is entirely introverted. As Buddhism is in many ways a yogic practice that may also be termed the yoga of the middle way. You can call Buddhism the yoga of the middle way, or the yoga of wisdom. We may first look at the technique of Buddhist meditation. According to Rupert Gethin, meditation refers to mental or spiritual exercise aimed at developing and cultivating wholesome mental states that conduce to the realization of the Buddhist path. According to a cardinal principle of Buddhist psychology, our minds are fundamentally clear and pure. They have become stained by the operation of adventitious defilements, klesha. The goal of Buddhist practice is to bring to an end the operation of these defilements. The basic method is to restore to the mind something of its fundamental state of clarity and stillness. This clarity of mind provides the opportunity for seeing into the operation of the defilements, for seeing things as they really are. The way of returning the mind to its state of clarity is by the use of the techniques of calm meditation, which can temporarily suppress or block the immediate defilements that disturb the mind. The way of seeing clearly into the nature of the mind is by the methods of insight meditation, which can finally eradicate those defilements. An ancient simile compares the mind to, and its continually prey to, the 5 hindrances to a bowl of water, disturbed or contaminated in 5 ways, mixed with red dye, steaming hot, full of moss and leaves, ruffled by the wind and muddled in the dark place. If someone should look down into a bowl of water, contaminated in any one of these 5 ways, then he could not be able to see a clear and true reflection of himself. On the other hand, if one were to look down into a bowl of water that is free of such contaminations, one would see a clear and true reflection. So all that was a quote by Rupert Gettin. Being a yogic text, the Bhagavad Gita also promotes meditation, but a different one, as opposed to the Buddhist meditation, which focuses on the mind itself, with the aim of seeing clearly into the nature of the mind. The Gita promotes a theistic form of meditation focusing on the Supreme Person. As such, it reads, and now I turn to the 8th chapter, and I want to read read theistic meditation, not Buddhist meditation, but Gita, theistic meditation. So that's 8.8. O Partha, he who meditates on the Supreme Divine Person through constant yoga practice, with an unswerving consciousness, goes to him. Abhyasa yoga yuktena chaitasa nanyagamina paramam purusham divyan yati paratano chintayan. That's a devotional meditation. One should meditate on him as the ancient seer, as the controller, as smaller than the atom, as the supporter for all, as having an inconceivable form, as brilliant as the sun, and beyond darkness. His mind unwavering, absorbed in devotion, supported by the strength of yoga, his life very focused between the eyebrows. One who is thus established at the hour of death reaches that supreme divine person. Interesting. So we have in the Gita also meditation, but theistic, Krishna-centered meditation. This devotional meditation is somewhat similar to the latter section, to a later section, which also promotes meditation on divine, although the later section is more cosmogonic and nature-oriented. In summary, I mean, chapter 10. In summary, the Gita promotes meditation, but as opposed to other forms of meditation, it is a personal type of meditation concentrating on the Supreme and the various manifestations of divinity. So the next category is divinity of nature and ecological worldview. Very relevant. The topic of the divinity of nature in the Bhagavad Gita is closely linked to the topic of environmental teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. And as such, we will link those two aspects together. As a general remark, Lance Nelson, a famous scholar of ecology and Hinduism, notes that the Gita, like other ancient religious texts, does not address contemporary ecological issues directly, for it was composed long before the ecological crisis emerged. As such, in reading the Gita from an ecological perspective, we reframe its teaching in light of problems it was not intended to address. Nelson ties together the Gita's spirituality with its ethics of self-restraint, which in modern terms could be termed anti-consumerism. He writes that there is no doubt that a deeply held belief in the superordinate value of non-material spiritual reality has the potential, if rendered sufficiently compelling, to do much to undercut the ecologically damaging ethos of the dominant consumerist, growth-oriented religion of the market. He notes that it is equally clear that the Gita provides such a spiritual vision It teaches of the existence of a transcendent supreme being upon whom the universe is dependent for its existence. It teaches, in addition, to a spiritual self, Atman, that dwells within each person. It reminds its devotees that full awareness of the spiritual dimension is indispensable for authentic happiness, and that such awareness cannot be attained without setting strict limitations on to human tendency to live for gratification of desires, sense pleasures, and ego indulgences. Indeed, the Bhagavad Gita calls for more than a limitation of wants. It envisions a demanding asceticism in which desires and egoism are to be utterly renounced. If an ethic of restraint is wanted, the text certainly has it. All that is a quote by Lance Nilsson, who's a great scholar and my personal friend. Apparently, the Gita could be offered an ecological commentary, and as in many ways, last sections of the text have ecological implications. Christopher Keith Chappell knows that mountains and rivers not only have long been considered sacred within India, but have been seen as an integral part of the human experience, a source of both spiritual and economic strength. That's by Christopher Chappell, famous scholar of yoga and ecology, and also a personal friend. He further notes that numerous Vedic hymns celebrate the earth and water, asking for protection and glorifying the root constitutes of the natural world. The Purusha Sukta, one of the best-known hymns of the Rig Veda, proclaims a continuity between humans and the cosmos, stating that the gods and heavens and earth itself arise from the primal person, Purusha. This assertion of relationship carries an innate message of interconnectedness that could be used to advocate respect for nature and the elements. Many of the later legal books of Brahminical tradition stipulate that trees are to be protected and that water must not be defiled. That's by Chris Chappell. The Gita not only adheres to these views, but also carries a panentheistic view according to which the elements, as well as the spirit souls, are part of the divine nature. Right, now quote from the 7th chapter of the Gita. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intellect, and ego. These 8 comprise my separated lower nature. But you should know that besides this lower nature, mighty armed one, there is another higher nature of mine comprised of spirit souls, by which this world is sustained. Realize that all entities have the source in these 2 natures. I am the origin of this entire universe, and if its dissolution too. O Dhananjaya, there exists nothing higher than me. Everything rests upon me as pearls are strung on a thread. I am the taste of water, O Kunti. I am the light of the sun and the moon. I am the sacred syllable Om and all the Vedas, the sound in ether and humanity in man. The pure fragrance of the earth am I, and the brilliance in fire. I am the life of all living beings and the austerity of the ascetics. Know me, O Partha, to be the primeval seed of all creatures, the wisdom of the wise, and the splendor of the splendid. And of the mighty I am might, devoid of lust and passion. That desire in all creatures am I, which is not inconsistent with dharma, O Bharatashaba. Know that all states of being, be they characterized by sattva, rajas, and tamas, have their source in me alone, but I am not in them. Very beautiful vision, highlighting the divinity of nature. Concerning this panentheistic relation between the supreme and the world, a scholar called Mum knows that the Upanishadic analogy of the spider and its web, often quoted by Ramanuja, is particularly illustrative of the Vishishta Advaita view of the soul-body relation between the Lord and the world. First, it suggests the stimulus reality of the Lord and the world. If a spider can produce a real web from its body, why cannot the Lord? Furthermore, it points to their difference in nature, even though the latter arises from the former, its material and efficient cause. Here, unlike in panentheistic theologies, There's no room to claim that God is tainted with the world's evil, for defects in its web do not touch the spider, nor do defects in the body affect the soul. That was a quote by Mum. Lot refers to these relations and writes that the Srivashtava pantheistic theology maintains a balance between divine transcendence and immanence, which preserves the transcendent purity of the divine while firmly establishing and preserving the value of the world. The soul-body relationship between the world and the divine is an intimate one, marked by real communication between the three realms of God, soul and matter. God is not divorced from or discontinuous with his creatures, but eternally and inseparably related to them, quote by Lot. This pantheistic view of the world awards a sense of sacredness to the world and offers an alternative to the view of nature as a resource to be exploited, alternating it with the sense of divinity. So now I'm coming to the conclusion section of this lecture, and the last category is devotion, with which I will also end this lecture series. We have dedicated a lecture to the topic of devotion or bhakti, and have offered a division of 4 categories: bhakti supported by dharma, bhakti supported by yoga, bhakti supported by jnana, and unsupported bhakti or pure devotion. In the following section, which concludes this lecture series, we wish to treat bhakti in humanistic terms, which include devotion in all spheres of life, including the religious sphere, but not limited to that sphere. Perhaps a central term in this regard is loka sangraha, which may be translated as the welfare of the world. I'd like to quote Julius Lipner, famous and important scholar. Critical apparatus to his translation of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's Anandamat, which represents the sense of humanistic devotion. Lipner writes that in the second half of the 19th century Bengal, there was a powerful convergence of views for a certain way of living in the world, selfless action for the sake of human welfare from Bankim's guiding sources, Western and Indian, which apparently represented both the positivism of Auguste Comte and the Gita. This was perhaps the cornerstone of the revisionary ideology he was constructing. However, the Gita had one advantage for Bankim over his Western sources, as it inculcated belief in and devotion to a real God. This real God had made an exemplary descent, avatara, into the world in the person of Krishna Vasudeva in order to embody his teaching of selfless action for the welfare not only of humanity, but also of all living beings. Quote, the Bhagavad Gītā was more universal in its salvific scope than the Western philosophical thought of religion. Further, its teaching was expressed in language and imagery with which Hindus could feel at home. It could be interpreted to endorse a spiritual discipline of an integral yoga of knowledge, action, and love, whereby human happiness lay in the fullest possible development of human faculties, which, when direct to God, involved sublimation of egoism. Bankim went on to argue that this development led one to see God as indwelling in the world, so that the love of God in its proper sense implied unselfish love of the self, the other, community, society, country, and the whole world, in an ascending order of integral service. One can see here the scope for selfless political action in the service of one's country. These ideas were already beginning to take shape in Anandamat. All this is a quote by Julius Lipner. As opposed to the sophisticated types of devotion described, divided into grades and types, the description here is that of a more general and humanistic devotion directed towards God, but also expresses love of self, the other, the community, the society, the country, and the whole world. This indeed grasped by the term lokasangraha, in that one acts in the mood of devotion, service, and love for the benefit of others and of the world. Julius Lipner notes that this is why Bankim Chandra Chatterjee included from the very first edition of the novel an epigraph to a text the following extract from the Gita, chapter 12, where Krishna speaks. And now I quote. The 12th chapter. Those who grade me as the Supreme and offer all their activities unto me, who meditate on me and worship me through undistracted yoga, for them I am the savior from the ocean of samsara and death. O Partha, I appear for them without delay, as they have given me their heart. Fix your mind on me alone and absorb your consciousness in me. Thus you shall surely abide in me. Apparently, according to Bankim's interpretation, we see here inculcated the path and the goal of selfless bhakti, dedicated service to God, which is the foundation upon which service to humanity and in fact every humanistic endeavor should be infused. Perhaps Bankim Chandra's idea of Loka Sangra, according to which every humanistic endeavor should be infused with devotion for the welfare of the world, may be taken as the cornerstone of the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gītā. Thank you very much.